Welcome back. We're unpacking the results of the recent provincial Alberta election. And joining me again is Mike Donison and also Rob Anders. Rob, just before commercial break, you were talking about who's in, who's out. You referenced Sky Palace ministers. I know what that's about, but tell our viewers, what do you mean by Sky Palace?
Well, during the height, if you want to call it that, of the lockdowns, where they were saying, do this and do that, and don't visit your mother in hospital, and all this type of stuff, they went ahead and held a big party in the Sky Palace, which was the old federal building refurbished by Alison Redford at tremendous taxpayer expense. And they were up on the patio, drinking Jameson's whiskey and hanging out, not caring about masks or social distancing or any of that type of stuff. And it was incredibly hypocritical. So that was a turning point. That was an inflection point for sure with regard to the lockdown stuff in Alberta. Was people said, well, hold on, you're asking us to obey all these types of rules, and you're not. And so what happened there was, now that premier's gone, and almost all of those ministers that were up there, the only one that survived was Jason Nixon in Rocky Mountain House, which has been a stalwart conservative riding. Alf Hook, longest member of the Legislative Assembly in Alberta for social credit, held it back in 1938 type of thing. So he held on to that, but his brother was wiped out in Calgary.
Okay, well, let's talk about the urban-rural divide. Mike, does that still hold true in Alberta? I know, for example, in Ontario, where I reside, urban voters tend to vote one way, rural voters tend to vote another way. Is this the case now? Do we now see this divide in Alberta?
Well, it's still there, but the difference is the NDP have broken into Calgary. But if you take the strictly rural seats, the non-Edmonton, non-Calgary seats, except one or two, I mean, they're overwhelmingly UCP, and the majorities there are huge. And in the urban areas, Edmonton, every seat went NDP, every single seat, including Edmonton Southwest, the one UCP was holding. Mm-hmm. And in Calgary now, it's split. So the NDP have made major incursions into Calgary.
And why is that? Why have the NDP managed to make those incursions?
Well, Rob may be willing to say more than that. I think part of it is, quite frankly, Danielle Smith, unfortunately, scored a lot of own goals. And the mainstream media went out of its way to demonize her in terms of some very unpopular positions she appeared to be taking. And so I think it just hurt the UCP in those urban areas. They just felt that maybe she was a little too extreme. And the great success for the UCP is they were able to fight back and just do enough, just barely enough, to avoid a complete drift of that urban Calgary vote to the NDP. They were able to fight it back. But that's the reason I think there were such big incursions into Calgary, is that Smith, it's a cultural thing. I think she struck, when she ran for the leadership, a pretty right-wing, strong conservative position, and that may have alienated some urban voters, but obviously not enough.
So did people... Yeah, so Rob, did people then remember those words from the leadership? Because running in a leadership campaign is very different than a general election. So was she trying to tone that down and it wasn't enough then for the Calgary voters? Why are the NDP making such incursions?
Well, I'm going to talk about kind of mechanics, because a lot of that gets lost in the process sometimes. But, the NDP, even during COVID, had the unions out door knocking, and they were getting, say, for example, lawn signs, "We support public education," obviously the Alberta Teachers Association doing its work. So if somebody said, oh, that nasty NDP, they're campaigning during COVID, they're going door knocking, etc., they shouldn't be doing that, they could just say, well, it wasn't us. And so they were identifying their vote while the UCP was kind of coasting on its laurels. And you saw that the parks, Save Alberta Parks, et cetera. So that was the, Environmentalist Sierra Club, et cetera. So all these groups were identifying the vote for the NDP. The other thing is, the UCP did not understand its messaging. Like when they came into this campaign, I wish I had one to show you, it's out the other room, but they had this stuff that was absolute word salad. I mean, it was the biggest brochure I think I've ever seen in cardstock. It must have had 1,000 words on it. They had no idea what they were campaigning on. It wasn't until the last week of the election where you saw these signs that said cut taxes, make streets safer, build more pipelines, where they finally figured out what the message was. It took them the entire campaign to figure out what their message was. So that did not help them at all.
Okay. Which issues would have resonated more than in the urban areas than Mike versus the rural? We only have about 30 seconds.
Yeah, okay. First of all, everything that she ran on for the leadership, she ran away from during the campaign. She didn't talk about sovereignty. The UCP ran on, she talked about a healthcare guarantee. She talked about the Calgary arena.
Yes.
And the other thing she did, which I really think helped the UCP in Alberta, is a referendum. She promised read my lips, no new taxes without a referendum. I think that resonated really well. And just so we don't
Okay, I'm just going to pause you there. We got to cut to commercial.
I'm sorry.
And we'll be right back.